Nation! It's your boy John here today, and we are back. The NFL is back. It's season kickoff tonight, or coming up whenever you're watching this. Week 1, Thursday Night Football is here, and we're going to be back with Thursday Night Football props all season long. I've got a special for you in this season return as well, though, because it's the Brazil game. It's the Packers and it's Eagles. They're playing in Brazil. That should be an exciting game as well. We'll get stuck into that soon, but we're going to do season kickoff in Kansas City. It's the Baltimore Ravens going to the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think it's going to be a really, really fantastic game. At the moment, it is Chiefs favored -2.5. Over-under is sitting at 46.5 as well, so we haven't got any favoritism on the Patrick Mahomes underdog bets. We're going to have to ride with him being the favorite as usual, as he usually is as well. Glad that you're here. I'm glad that you're joining with us. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. It's a really free way that helps us grow the channel. And follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter as well. And leave a review on Apple and Spotify if you feel so inclined as well. We're going to be here all season long. We're going to do regular programming similar to what we did last season, where I did the Thursday night football games. That was really good. We had a really, really good record. I think we finished around like 65% in the end. We were cruising around 70% for most of the season as well. So that was exciting. We're going to be tracking the bets as well. Sully and I, we're going to be bringing you the Sunday slate as usual. We're bringing you our favorite bets. We're even going to do a 25 for 25. 25 players to get 25 receiving yards. It's going to be insane. We'll see how we go. I'm still going to be doing footy as well. Footy season is still in the finals coming. We'll still have bringing you that as well. Excited for that. We'll see how that goes too. But without further ado, let's get into the props. And we will start with the visitors. We'll start with the Baltimore Ravens. And let's take a little look back at their season last year. We did go over it, Sully and I, in our off-season previews for each team. We went team by team. It was a really good series. If you haven't checked it out, go check that out as well. Baltimore Ravens, they were definitely undervalued for most of the season. As we mentioned, they were often covering the spreads, which is really, really good to see, especially towards the end of the season. From week 11 on, they basically covered the spread every single week up until their ultimate demise to Kansas City at home. Opposing quarterbacks did actually manage to get a fair bit of success, probably more than you'd expect, because the assumption was the Baltimore Ravens defense was very, very good, but it wasn't always the case. You know, there's like Brock Purdy had 250 passing yards. They were playing from behind, but they came back and he went over his prop lines. Trevor Lawrence went over his. Matt Stafford had a really low prop line. He went over his. Even Jared Goff back earlier in the season as well. So quarterbacks were actually able to pass on the Ravens, and I'm pretty sure it's because the Ravens would get out to a bit of a lead and then they'd have to play catch up. Not always the case, though, that quarterbacks were scoring passing touchdowns, though, which is interesting to see. If you look at the quarterback pass attempts, though, again, it does tell that story of sort of playing from behind. Almost all quarterbacks went over their passing attempts, except for Geno. And that was that game where the Seahawks got massively shut out. It was a really bad game for the Seahawks. Similar with the Titans as well. They were still trying to figure it out. But other than those two, and the Joe Burrow injury, of course, as well, everyone was passing on the Ravens, trying to keep up with them. Most of the time, they were getting completions as well. So interesting to see that. Also, running backs. Running backs were able to rush on the Ravens defense, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of a similar situation. I think that we're going to see a lot of Isiah Pacheco in this game particularly. Kyle Hamilton, one of their stud corners, he was okay. He did give up a couple of big games as well. We know Puka Nacua had a big game against them, as did the 49ers guys, and even Nico Collins managed to have a good game, even despite the loss there. And tight ends as well is something that we might look to attack here. But I'm not looking at Travis Kielce here. I'm worried about the early season resting of Travis Kielce. So potentially we might look Noah Gray's way. I'm trying to think if they added any other tight ends in the draft. I thought there might be one. We'll get back to that. We'll take a look at the Kansas City Chiefs 2023, a little look back there as well. They were a bit of a slump through the middle of the season. They came out firing. Of course, Mahomes, September, the two, they go hand in hand every single year. Outside of that opening night loss to Detroit, which was pretty crazy. But, I mean, we know that Detroit Lions are a very good team now. If you listen to the off-season previews, you know I've got Detroit going to the Super Bowl, so we'll see how that goes. They had a tough game against Denver. Tough game against Philly as well, and Green Bay got the better of them, but then they did start to eventually get it together towards the end of the season, and come playoffs, they just went on a crazy run. Very, very good. Now, their defense was excellent. It was definitely a top 5 defense last season, and you can see that when it comes to quarterback expected passing yards. They all struggled. The only one who didn't, I guess, at the end of the season was Lamar Jackson. And we know why, because it's at 210 passing yards and they were playing from behind. So, of course, they had to. That was a game that they could have won if it had not been for that L'Jarius Sneed touch through the back of the end zone on Zay Flowers. What a bummer. Jordan Love, who was playing lights out, he got over his as well. And weirdly, Aiden O'Connell as well. Bit weird. But other than that, most other quarterbacks struggled. Dolphins really struggled against them as well. Bengals struggled, and they were playing Jake Browning as well, so that's to be expected. Wide receiver ones were getting shut down all over the place. Now, I'll leave it up to you. I'm trying to think, was it L'Jarius Sneed or Trent McDuffie who was the one laying down the business? I think it might have been L'Jarius Sneed, and he's gone now. He's in Tennessee, so it's going to be up to Trent McDuffie. So I wonder if that's going to make a huge impact, because wide receiver 2 was getting a lot more success in that area as well. Chiefs linebackers as well in Nick Bolton, doing a pretty good job on tight ends and running backs as well. Running backs sort of had struggled as well to get through the defensive line. A few pass catching options though as well. A few scrimmage yards options there when they were not playing so well as well. So this should be an interesting game. I am looking Derrick Henry's way in his first game for the Ravens. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's see what we come up with. We'll start with the quarterbacks. We'll start with Lamar Jackson. So as you can see, Lamar, he was very 50-50 last year. There was some games where he was going over 240 passing yards. There are other games where he was going under 220. So hard to get a gauge on. In almost all of his games, though, his receivers were not catching the ball. So they're not helping him out in any way there. He was always going under, or most of the time he was going under his pass completions and similarly pass attempts. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is the case if they start to rely heavily on Derrick Henry. So I'm looking at Lamar Jackson's lines here. I've set it at 240 passing yards, 27 passing attempts, 18 passing completions, and then 45 rushing yards as well. I think it's going to, you got to remember, when it comes to season kickoff as well, everyone's really hyped, so usually lines are inflated. I love looking for unders bets in this situation. And given the Chiefs defense, I'm looking at if we get under 18.5 pass completions, under 19, it is a bit of a risk if the Chiefs get out to a lead, an early lead. They're going to have to pass the ball a lot more, but I think that they're going to try and slow the game down. I think this is going to be a similar game plan to what the Lions came into Kansas City last year to do to them as well, with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. They were just pounding the rock all day, relying on turnovers. I think it's going to be a similar game script. So with that said, if Lamar Jackson's sitting around 230, 240 passing yards, I'm thinking the under for this game. I'm thinking the under for completions. I'm not sure about attempts. I might leave attempts as is for now. And rushing, I'm going to stay off rushing for now as well with Lamar, because he was a bit 50-50 as well last year. We'll take a look at Patrick Mahomes, and he was also a little bit 50-50 in a lot of games towards the end of the season as well. Wasn't dealing with too many injuries that I'm aware of. It wasn't until the playoffs that he really started to come alive. So line at the moment for season opener set around 275 passing, 1.5 passing touchdowns. Passing attempts were setting that at 36.5 in line with last season, and 24.5 for pass completions. And that is pretty much the base of what he had last season. Whether or not he always got there is another thing. 25 rushing yards as well for Mahomes, and we'll do a long of 37.5, and we might adjust this, see how we go. As we get closer to kickoff, I'm probably going to stay off Patrick Mahomes for this one particularly. I know he really owns the month of September. It is a home game. The last year's game has kind of thrown me a little bit. If I was going to look at anything, it'd probably be the passing attempts at 36.5. He does have a habit of typically going over those. Not always the completions, though. I'm going to be interested to see what the addition of Xavier Worthy does. and Marquise Brown. So that's two really high impact players, and they're probably going to replace Marcus Valdes-Scantling, and Kadarius Toney is still there. So is Sky Moore, but I think that they're going to be less involved. So we're going to look more that way. We're going to jump to the running backs now, and this is where I kind of want to get a bit more into it. So, as mentioned, the Ravens, they brought in Derrick Henry from the Titans in the offseason, and I think everyone cheered because it is a fantastic addition. It's almost like the perfect pairing, a match made in heaven. He's come in to replace Gus Edwards and replace J.K. Dobbins, who both seemingly have gone to the Chargers at the same time. This should be an interesting game for Derrick Henry, particularly on the ground where the Chiefs are a little bit beatable. So, I've set the line at 16.5 rushing attempts, which is way more than any other running back on the Ravens got last season. Thinking about 65.5 rushing yards. I'm liking to bet the over there. I do anticipate that there will be a little bit of hype for Derrick Henry, though, particularly the first game of the season for him. So could go up to 70, could get as high as 75. I'd almost be willing to bet that as well. I'd be pretty comfortable with that. Passing yards and things like that, I'm going to stay off that. I want to see what happens there. Gus Edwards hardly got many catches in his role there. Even similarly with Justice Hill, who is the pass-catching running back, so stay away from that. And I'll stay away from the scrimmage by that standard as well. The longest rush of 14.5 is interesting as well. It'll be interesting to see if he can rip off one of those in the fourth quarter. I'll stay off that for now, though, in the first game back. Justice Hill, going to stay away from him as well, and we won't see any Keaton Mitchell either. We'll take a look at Isiah Pacheco, and I'm not going to be looking Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's way at this stage. We'll see if he becomes a bit more involved as the season goes on. I believe Jerick McKinnon is still kicking around as well. The Chiefs haven't made too many changes to the running back room there. I like Isiah Pacheco in this game. If you go back and look at his game logs through the postseason last year, and even towards the end of the year, he was smashing over all his rushing attempts. They were rushing the ball actually more than I cared to pay attention. I know Sully loves Isiah Pacheco. I'm not much of an Isiah Pacheco guy, but the stats don't lie. He was getting the ball a ton, and he was doing a really, really fantastic job with it as well. You can get him for 55, 60, even 65 yards. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I expect the attempts to be around 13.5 as well, even up to 15.5. I would not go higher than that. In fact, I probably wouldn't even look at 15.5 because it has sort of been sitting around there. As far as pass catching goes for Isiah Pacheco, we stay away from that. He rarely got more than 15 yards, and by default, we won't look at the scrimmage either. But let's lock that in. Let's lock in Isiah Pacheco. I'm going to say 55.5 rushing yards. If we can get up to 60, I'm fine with that. We'll go up to 60 rushing yards for Isiah Pacheco. We'll take a look now at the Ravens pass catchers, and we're looking at the addition of Tez Walker. I'm not expecting to see too much of him in his first game. And then they've lost Odell Beckham as well in the offseason. That really didn't pan out, particularly towards the end of the year. Zay Flowers was very, very hit or miss, very boom or bust. There's nothing there that I really want to bet for Zay Flowers at this time. I just need to see a little bit more consistency from him. Also, if he's the receiver one and he's got Trent McDuffie on him, that gives me a lot of concern. Nick Bolton's going to be lined up on Mark Andrews, but I think Mark Andrews is talented enough to overcome it. I've got him for 50.5 receiving yards, and I've also got him for 4.5 catches as well. I like the over on both of those. I'd even like the over on Isiah Likely if we can get it. 35.5 passing yards is pretty good. 3.5 receptions as well. I like the over 35.5 there as well. I might actually update that now. And it's going to be interesting to see how they move the ball on the Chiefs. I think the conditions will be favorable. It should be okay. As far as Rashod Bateman goes, now they've signed him to a 2-year extension, and I can't believe that because I think Rashod Bateman absolutely sucks. But he did come on a little bit towards the end of the year. So if we can get a line that's less than 35 receiving yards, dare I say less than 30, I would almost be willing to bet the over on that. It's just going to be tricky to see because I know that Lamar Jackson has made a concerted effort to lose weight in the offseason in a bid to do more rushing, but I don't think that that's going to be too much of a problem for the pass catchers because they do always, he does like to throw the ball long on them. So we'll see how that goes. And we'll finish now with the Chiefs wide receivers. And at this stage, it looks like Rashee Rice is still going to be playing. It is the case. He had a really fantastic end of the second half of the season Last year, from week 12 on, he was smashing all his props. He was going over 4.5 receptions every week. He was going over 45.5 passing catches, receiving yards is what I meant to say. Gee, I'm a bit rusty as well. And they've lost Marquise Valdez-Scantling. I think they're going to rely less on Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore. Those two did not pan out, but they did add in the draft Xavier Worthy, their first-round pick, and they picked up Marquise Brown off the Cardinals as well. I like both of those additions. I don't think Marquise Brown is going to be too much of an impact player for the Chiefs here. I think he's probably going to start to fizzle out. I think his career might be slowly winding down. And then speaking of slowly winding down, we do need to have a discussion about Travis Kielce because he took a really long time to get going last season. He was really bad to bet on if you were trying to bet overs with him. He really didn't get going to the postseason, and throughout the year, he just could not make his props at all, but he was always just getting close enough to make you think, could this be the week? So we stay off Travis Kielce. He didn't play in last year's season opener. I'm not expecting him to have a huge role. I think they're going to be throwing the ball a ton. I think they're going to be throwing the ball deep to their speed receivers to see how that pans out as well. So with that said, let's have a look at the ticket. Okay, we're going to start with, at this stage, I'm looking at potentially Derrick Henry over 65.5 rushing yards. I like that. I also like Isiah Pacheco over 60.5 rushing yards. I'm trying to work out between Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. I'm going to go with Mark Andrews on this one because this is an important game that the Ravens, I think, will need to win. So let's go over 50.5 receiving yards for Mark Andrews. I'll stay off Tez. If you can get Rashod Bateman at 25.5 receiving yards, I don't mind that as well. Rashee Rice, if he's sitting around 4.5 receptions, I like that one. I wouldn't mind a deep ball to Xavier Worthy as well. If he's got a long of around 22.5 receiving yards, I would love to see a deep bomb there as well. So we'll go with that as well. Okay, but we're not done yet because we've got now the Friday night football game, or Saturday if you're watching in Australia like I will be. It's the Brazil game. So this is the first time teams have played in Brazil. It's between the Green Bay Packers, the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think this is going to be a fantastic game. At this stage, the Eagles are favored -1.5. The over-under is sitting at a very healthy 48.5 as well. So expect a few fireworks in this one, which I'm excited for. We'll start with the Green Bay Packers, who I guess you could say, I mean, they're both visitors, but I guess in this instance, they are the visitors here. So we'll take a look back at their season last year, and they got off to a really slow start, it has to be said. They came out of the gates at 2-5, I want to say. At 1.3 and 6, it was not looking good for them. And then Jordan Love, after the bye, they made some adjustments. They got it together. Jaden Reed was an absolute phenomenon. And then you remember they just had all these really mediocre pass catching receiving weapons. And it was like Bo Melton, Dontavian Wicks was coming out of nowhere as well. Jaden Reed was a phenomenon. We weren't expecting that. Christian Watson was injured a lot. Tucker Kraft was even doing really well. So, has to be said, there's a few really good options here. We talked about it in the off-season programming that I feel like the Packers are like a T. Higgins type of receiver away from actually making a decent crack at the Super Bowl. But in any case, I love Jordan Love. I also really love the additions of Josh Jacobs and even Marshawn Lloyd. I was not a big Marshawn Lloyd guy, but I love him to replace A.J. Dillon as well. I think the Packers did an amazing job with the Josh Jacobs contract as well, because they effectively offered the same contract that Aaron Jones got going to Minnesota, but Josh Jacobs is like 3 years younger than him. So that's a really great restart on that sort of age gap as well. We'll look at how the defense went. Not too well. Teams were able to rush all over the Packers' rushing defense, particularly even Tony Pollard had some success. We saw people like Rashad White for the Bucs had a really good game as well with his scrimmage yards. Saquon Barkley was able to get over them. Isiah Pacheco we talked about. Jameer Gibbs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and all these players are able to have a lot of success. Jair Alexander was injured for quite a lot of it as well, so receiver ones had a patch where they were getting success, but when he came back, it was shut down time again, so that was great to see. But quarterbacks were able to throw on the Packers quite a bit because they were having some issues with their receiver twos, and there was a lot of like just blown coverages and busted coverages that teams were able to take advantage with them as well. So we'll take a look at that. There's a few options. I really like this game. I think this is going to be a really interesting game. We'll check now with the Eagles, and they got off to an absolutely firing start. They were something like, what was that, 11 or 10-1 after 12 weeks, and then it absolutely fell apart from them. They couldn't get over Arizona. They only just snuck by the Giants, and then it got to the playoffs, and everyone knew it. They were done. It just was not working out. So they've had to make some huge changes. They've made some huge changes at cornerback. They drafted Quinyon Mitchell. They drafted Cooper DeJean as well. They've made some changes to bolster the defensive line as well. So even though not every quarterback was getting their passing yards against them, a lot of teams were able to rush on them in the second half of the season. I don't expect that to still be the case. I'm looking at this first half of the season here where every running back was struggling against them, but I'm also looking at these receivers. I think that this is where it's going to be a lot of money to be made here on the overs, is in the receiver 1, the receiver 2. They've got some good cornerbacks, the Eagles, but I think that the rookies, I mean, they're still rookies, and this is going to be their first game. It's international. It's a pretty brutal place to have to kick off your first game as well. So good value to be had here. Let's jump into the quarterbacks. And as I mentioned, really love Jordan Love in this spot. So we've got his passing yards sitting around 260 passing yards, which is a lot, but he was very efficient at throwing the ball in the second half of the season last year. 1.5 passing touchdowns looks very good. He was able to achieve this very, very often. So don't be surprised if that actually gets up to 2.5 passing touchdowns as well. If it's a 2.5, wouldn't mind betting the under, but if it's a 1.5, wouldn't mind betting the over on that as well. I'm expecting about 33.5 passing attempts, which is sort of in line with last year, especially towards the end of the season. I think people are going to be excited about this game. It is a primetime game, so I expect that to be over as well. The 20.5 pass completions as well, expect that to be over. I think this is going to be another case where these, dink and duck running backs, pass catchers who are able to get the ball at the line of scrimmage or downfield like Christian Watson are going to be able to make plays, and they're going to have a lot of success moving the chains. I'm expecting a lot of plays. I'm expecting a lot of yardage as well. So would love to stack pass completions with passing yards if you can for Jordan Love. As far as rushing yards go, 15.5 is where it's at. I'm not looking that way because he basically was not rushing the ball at all. He's more of a pocket passer and a damn good one at that. But speaking of rushing the ball, let's jump to Jalen Hurts and see what he has in store this season. Similar to last year. So he really trailed off towards the end of the season last year. It's one of those situations where some players pre-buy and then post-buy are just two different players. It's the same thing with the team. So he was looking really, really good through the first half of the year up until the bye week. He was going over his passing yards very regularly, sitting around 240 passing yards, 250, having a lot of success. And then that just completely changed as soon as the bye was over, and he was not going over his lines at all. So always watch out for that. His rushing yards, he was starting the season around 40.5. And he was not really getting that as much as he should have been. It was going down to 35, even down to 30 in some places, and he still wasn't rushing the ball as well there. So that'll be interesting to see. They were trying to rely heavily on the run game. It didn't work with DeAndre Swift. So I'm expecting 240 passing yards for Jalen Hurts here, which honestly, I actually don't mind that because I think that AJ Brown and Devonta Smith both got paid in the offseason. I'm expecting them both to have really good games here. And if you stack that with Dallas Goedert as well and some Saquon Barkley leaks, I think that this is a good place for Jalen Hurts as well. He's got a lot more experience than Jordan Love in playing in these situations as well. Well, not a lot. I shouldn't say a lot. A little bit more. But as far as rushing goes, 35.5 rushing yards. I don't love it. I'm not going to touch it. If anything, if I had to bet, I'd bet the under on that one. I think that they're going to really rely mostly on Saquon Barkley to take the rushing from here on. If we take a look at the running backs for Green Bay, so they're two very new running backs in Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd, but I think that they're both very talented. I think that Josh Jacobs is on par with Aaron Jones as well, despite the age difference. So I'm expecting Josh Jacobs to have a successful season. Be interesting to see how he goes in this first game when I think that the Eagles' run defense is going to be quite good. I've got him for 55.5 rushing yards. I'm going to hold that for now. 14.5 rushing attempts as well. 2.5 receptions and 20.5 receiving yards. I'm going to stay away from that. I want to see how this game pans out in the first place. I think that this is going to be mostly through the air as well. And with that said, I'm also going to stay away from Marshawn Lloyd. Rookie, we're not going to bet them in their first games. That is for sure. We'll take a look at the Eagles running backs now, and there's a new face on a player from the same division. It's Saquon Barkley. He is now officially on the Philadelphia Eagles, and I actually think it does make them look a lot scarier than it was before with DeAndre Swift. They've kept around Kenneth Gainwell. They did draft Will Shipley as well, so I wonder if there'll be a bit of a changing of the guard there at the RB2 spot, but I'm expecting very, very big things from Saquon Barkley this year. In fact, in fantasy, I'm probably looking to aggressively draft him as well earlier rather than later because I think he's going to get fed the ball a ton. For this game, I've got him around 65.5 rushing yards. Could go all the way up to 70, 75.5 as well. I'd probably be comfortable with that. Sitting around 16.5 rushing attempts. Receiving yards, I've got it about 15.5 and 2.5 receptions just because we know that Jalen Hurts doesn't always typically check the ball down a ton. He did do it a little bit to DeAndre Swift last year, but I'm not sure that that's going to continue. I'd want to see how that pans out first. And then the 85.5 scrimmage yards. I actually don't mind that as well. If you could put the two together, you will have to buy the 5 yards, which I hate having to do that. But in this instance where he's a really good pass-catching running back, I'm okay with it. We'll stay off Kenneth Gainwell. We'll stay off Will Shipley as well in this first game. Just see how those guys pan out. We'll take a look at the Green Bay pass catchers. And we've got Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Luke Musgrave, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft, and dare I forget, Bo Melton. I mean, there's just so many freaking options here. We're looking at Christian Watson, Jaden Reed at this stage. I hate Romeo Doubs. You'll never see me bet Romeo Doubs. He's just so inconsistent. He was inconsistent last year. I don't care if he got you fantasy points and he scored touchdowns and all that kind of shit. I don't care. He's someone who I stay away from for betting strictly. Same with Christian Watson. He's extremely unreliable. He's like a fantastic deep threat, but you may as well bet the longest reception rather than his receiving yards, in my opinion. The receiver that I love is Jaden Reed. He was fantastic last season. He was one of those players who you made a lot of money on because he was flying under the radar for ages. Everyone else was focused on all these other rookie receivers. Meanwhile, it was Jaden Reed who was racking up all the receptions, all the receiving yards. But they know about him now. So we'll see how this goes. I still like him for 45.5 receiving yards. 3.5 receptions is a bit risky, but the connection there between Jordan Love and Jaden Reed is very nice. It's great to see Luke Musgrave back as well. Although I want to see, is it Luke Musgrave or is it Tucker Kraft who's getting all the touches here at the tight end position? Because last year, it was Tucker Kraft. Luke Musgrave did battle a lot of injuries and he did struggle to get onto the field more. Tucker Kraft was just doing such a good job there. So if you can find value on Tucker Kraft at about 30.5 receiving yards, no, I want to say like 25.5. Let's go with 2.5 receptions and 20.5 receiving yards. I'm just dropping it down even more. Then I like to bet that for Tucker Kraft because I think most people are going to be looking Luke Musgrave's way, and I'm just not sure about how this is going to pan out based on the stats from last season. Let's bring it home now with the Philadelphia Eagles receivers. We've got A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, and then they've added a few interesting additions. So Paris Campbell, Johnny Wilson they drafted, and they've also brought over Devontae Parker, who I'm not much of a Devontae Parker guy, but I do like the receiving room more so than last season when we were relying on like Quez, Watkins, and who was the other one? Shit, I can't remember. Anyway, A.J. Brown was fantastic to start the season last year, and then again with the bye weeks, really dropped off. So we stayed away from him for a long time there. I think we could go back to him, though, in this game. So he's probably going to have Jair Alexander on him, but I just think A.J. Brown's one of those receivers who's good enough to overcome that. And as a result, if you have a look at how it went last year, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see that in games where A.J. Brown was going over his prop lines, more often than not, Devonta Smith was going under his, unless it was a particularly bad defense. Same with Dallas Goedert. In fact, there was absolutely no week in which all three of them went over their receiving yards. So you have to pick because it's not going to be all of them. So my pick is A.J. Brown in this one, although I do understand if you want to go with Devonta Smith because, I mean, we saw the receiver 2 for Green Bay last year. They were giving it up quite often. This is going to be a very hostile territory that they're in. We don't know what the conditions are going to be like just yet. It's going to be too humid for them, so we'll see. You can, if Devonta Smith is around 20 less receiving yards, so he'll probably be around 60 and a half, 5.5 receptions. I'm okay with that. And also, if you can get Dallas Goedert for like 40 and a half receiving yards as well, really like that as well, because he was sitting around 35 and a half last year. And more often than not, he was getting it. So a few really good options there. Just to go back and repeat, so we'll take a quick look at them. So I really love Jordan Love over his passing yards. If it's sitting around 260, I'm perfectly comfortable with that. If you're feeling frisky, you could bet under his 15.5 rushing yards as well. Jalen Hurts over 240 passing yards. I really like that as well. Josh Jacobs, we're going to stay off him for rushing because we know the Eagles have got a good defense as far as run game goes. Saquon, if you can get him at 65.5 rushing yards, I really like that. 85.5 scrimmage yards, I also really like that. So maybe you'd be better off buying the extra 5 yards in lieu of getting any checkdowns. Jaden Reed, 45.5 receiving yards. Love that. I think that this could be a big Christian Watson game as well. So if they're both sitting around sort of like 45.5, I'm okay with that. And for the Eagles receivers, I'm going to do it. I'm going to flip. I'm going to go with Devonta Smith. I am actually worried more than I should be about Jair Alexander on A.J. Brown, and getting to that 80.5 rushing yards could be tricky. So let's go with Devonta Smith on as the receiver 2 option here. 60.5 receiving yards. Really like that. Just got paid. I think he's going to be happy about that. So that's going to do it for the ticket. And that's going to do it for our first episode back for the NFL season. Excited to be back. We'll be back for the Sunday slate episode with Sully as well. We're going to go through pretty much all of the games. It's going to be a long one, I have a feeling. We're going to give you our favorite picks. We'll take a look at the stats. We'll give you Sully's gut feels on what he thinks that there's going to be. And I'm just so glad that the NFL's back because it's been a long off season. This is our favorite time. You would have seen we've been doing footy props. We were doing hockey props in the off season. But this is really where a lot of our bankroll is made, and we're excited to have you. If you're still watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Helps us out. Give us your favorite bets. If you've got any prop bets that you like as well, we'd love to hear them. And follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter as well. Until next week, until the Sunday slate, enjoy season kickoff. I hope that your fantasy teams have a really good season. Hope you had a good draft. Hope your prop bets go well. We'll band together. We're going to make some money. It's going to be great. Until next time, goodbye.